And my neighbor, who had two sons, clearly had a favorite. And she staged a fraud inside her own home to make sure he got everything his brother had spent his entire life expecting to receive. I know. And I'm not talking about that subtle kind of favoritism where a mother makes excuses for one child and holds the other to a higher standard. No. She overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for her, realized her husband was about to choose the other son, and decided to change the outcome before he could announce it. And the most unbelievable part is that she didn't do it alone. We tend to think this kind of thing only happens in soap operas. Imagine my face as I watched an entire family destroy itself over a succession everyone knew would come eventually. The family had money, property, and a business built over many years. The father was respected, he was getting older, and he knew that sooner or later he would have to decide who would take the leading role after him. The two sons were twins, but you only had to spend 5 minutes with them to see that no one in that house treated them as equals. The one who had been born first was the kind of man his father understood immediately. Strong, outgoing, good with people, always out of the house, always coming back with a story, a contract he had closed, or something he had achieved on his own. The father loved that. He liked introducing him as the son who understood the real world, the son who knew how to walk into a room, solve a problem, and come back with results. The other one was different. Quieter,
Yes, sir.
more strategic.
Understood.
He preferred staying close to the family operation, watching, understanding how things worked, and waiting for the right moment. And that was exactly what the mother liked about him. She saw intelligence in him, patience, maybe even an ability his father simply refused to see. So the household began organizing itself in that way no family ever admits out loud, but everyone notices. The father had one son, the mother had the other. One received open admiration, the other received quiet protection, and both boys grew up knowing exactly which parent was on their side. You can already imagine what that does to brothers, can't you? The competition wasn't only about space. It was about approval, authority, about who would be recognized as the right son. And years before the major fraud, one incident had already shown how far that rivalry could go. One day, the older brother came home completely exhausted. He was starving, and he found the younger one preparing food. He asked for a plate. The younger brother could have simply served him, but he saw an opportunity. He said he would give him the food if his brother gave up right there, the right to be treated as the family's primary heir. I know, it sounds absurd. It's one thing to negotiate ownership in a company with lawyers, documents, and months of discussion. It's another to look at your own starving brother and turn a plate of food into an emotional signature that could change both of their lives. The older brother agreed. Maybe he thought it meant nothing. Maybe he believed no one would take a promise made in that condition seriously. Maybe he just wanted to eat and deal with the rest later. But the younger brother didn't forget. As far as he was concerned, it had already been decided. He had bought the future. There was only one problem. That conversation between the brothers didn't require their father to recognize anything, and their father continued treating the older son as the natural successor. Years passed. The father's health declined. His eyesight had become severely impaired, and he realized he needed to formalize his decision while he still could. So, he secretly called in the older son. He said he wanted to spend one final day with him the way they always had. He asked him to go out, personally handle a task only the two of them cared about, and return with his father's favorite dinner. After that conversation, he would make the announcement they had both expected for years. It wasn't only about money, it was authority. It was the final word on who would take the father's place before the family, the employees, and every business partner. But guess who heard everything? The mother. She hadn't been invited into the conversation. She hadn't been consulted. And she realized that if she didn't act immediately, her favorite son would be left behind for good. So she went straight to him, and she didn't waste time trying to sound reasonable. She told him his father was about to hand the leadership to his brother. She told him it had to be stopped. Then she presented a plan that could only work because her husband's health was already fragile, and because she knew both men's habits perfectly. She would prepare the dinner exactly as her husband expected. Her son would wear the coat and the fragrance. His brother always wore to important meetings. He would enter the office before his brother returned. He would say as little as possible, keep the lights low, and make his father believe the older son was standing in front of him. Now, do you think he looked at his mother and said, "This is insane"? Of course he didn't. He agreed to every part of the plan. Because there was one obvious problem. The brothers didn't look enough alike. Their voices were different. The way they spoke was different. The older brother's hands were much rougher, and he had a physical presence the younger one couldn't imitate. If their father came close, he would know. The mother said she would take care of it. And then she said something that shows just how committed she was. If it goes wrong, put the blame on me. Seriously, she didn't try to pretend it wasn't fraud. She only promised to take the consequences if they were caught. Then the operation began. She prepared the dinner. She took the older son's coat, sprayed the fragrance he wore, and made the younger one put on his brother's work gloves. She adjusted the clothes, dimmed the lights in the office, set the table exactly as her husband expected, and sent her son inside. The father could barely see, but he wasn't disconnected from the world. The moment the young man started speaking, he became suspicious. The voice sounded like the younger son. He asked how he had returned so quickly. The young man made up an explanation. Then the father asked him to come closer. He wanted to touch him. And this is where the entire fraud almost collapsed. The father held the gloved hands and said something that should have ended everything. The voice sounds like one son, but the hands feel like the other. But the disguise worked. The touch felt right. The smell was right. The dinner was exactly what he expected. And when someone wants to believe a certain version of events, sometimes 3 convenient signs overpower the one sign that feels wrong. The father asked again, "Are you really my older son?" And he answered, "I am," without hesitation. That was when he received what his brother had been expecting. The father called in 2 trusted family associates to witness the decision, and believing he was speaking to his older son, he signed the declaration naming the successor. It wasn't just a piece of paper. That document established who would hold authority over the family structure, who would represent the business, and who would speak in the father's name. In practical terms, he placed the younger son in the older son's position, and everything seemed to have worked perfectly. The young man left. The mother probably breathed a sigh of relief, but the brother returned almost immediately. He entered the office, placed the dinner on the table, and called out to his father. The first reaction was confusion. The father asked who was there. The son told him it was him, the older one. That was the moment the father realized what had happened, and his reaction was not small. He began to tremble, because he had just signed a document in front of the right witnesses, trusting that the man before him was his older son. Someone had used his failing eyesight, imitated his own brother, and left the office with the succession formally secured. The betrayed brother heard everything and fell apart. He begged his father to reverse it, to cancel the document, to make another announcement, to find some way to give him the place he had been promised. But the father said the decision had already been signed and confirmed before the right people. Reversing it now would destroy what remained of his authority and throw the entire family into a public battle. Now imagine what that meant for the older son. He already knew his brother had taken advantage of a weak moment to extract a promise about the future. Now he discovered that the same brother had also taken his father's formal confirmation, and he hadn't done it alone. Their own mother had organized everything. The man who entered that house expecting to receive his future left wondering whether he still had a place in the family at all. And that was when resentment became a threat. He decided that once their father died and the mourning period was over, he would kill his brother. The mother found out. Again, she knew before everyone else. She called in her favorite son and told him he had to run immediately. She sent him to stay with relatives and wait a few days until his brother's anger passed. A few days. It's almost cruel to hear that when you know what came next, because he left home and didn't return for many years. That mother had built the plan to secure his future, but the price was losing his presence. She managed to put her chosen son ahead, but she destroyed any possibility of the 2 brothers remaining under the same roof. And do you know what's worse? No one knows whether she ever saw him again. Maybe that's the saddest part. It wasn't. Only a fraud against the older son. It was a family using love, fear, and preference as weapons, and then acting surprised when no one could stay together anymore. It sounds like a very modern family drama, I know, but this happened thousands of years ago. The elderly father was Isaac. The mother who organized the disguise was Rebekah. The father's favorite son was Esau. The mother's favorite was Jacob. And yes, they were twins. The story appears in Genesis 25 and 27. In the original version, the plate of food was the sale of the birthright. The private conversation with the father was the blessing intended for the older son. Rebekah really did overhear Isaac calling Esau. She really did prepare the food. She really did dress Jacob in his brother's clothes. And she really did place young goat skins over her son's hands and neck to deceive her own husband. The original version is not less extreme than the adaptation. It's more extreme. But the most important point isn't simply discovering that this story is in the Bible. It's realizing that the scheme only worked because that family had already been divided for years. The fraud didn't create the favoritism. It only revealed how far everyone was willing to go to make sure their side won. And that is what makes this story so current. Because the question isn't only how Jacob obtained the blessing, the question is how a family reaches the point where love, future, and authority are treated as though only one child is allowed to win. Let's take this household apart from the inside, because no one in it fits neatly into the role of innocent victim. Rebekah clearly favored Jacob. Isaac clearly favored Esau. Genesis presents that division before any fraud takes place, almost as if warning us that the problem began long before the disguise. But Rebekah also carried information Isaac may not have considered. During her pregnancy, she received the answer that 2 nations would come from those sons, and that the older would serve the younger. For some readers, that explains why she believed Jacob should occupy that position. But explaining something is not the same as excusing it. If she was so certain, why didn't she confront her husband? Why didn't she put the information on the table? Why did she choose to deceive a nearly blind man and turn her own son into an accomplice? Maybe because no one in that house spoke directly to anyone. Isaac calls Esau in secret. Rebekah listens in secret. Rebekah calls Jacob in secret. Jacob enters in disguise. Esau turns his pain into a threat. Rebekah learns about the threat and sends Jacob away using a different explanation when speaking to Isaac. The Yibwa's entire family operates through parallel conversations. Everyone knows something. No one knows everything. And each person uses the information they have to move the others. Now look at Esau. He had already given up the birthright for food. He wasn't deceived in that moment. Jacob absolutely exploited his vulnerability. But Esau accepted the deal and swore to it. Then he ate, drank, and walked away. The narrative itself summarizes that act as treating the birthright with contempt. That helps explain why some traditions see him as irresponsible. But it does not turn the later fraud into justice. When Esau realizes he has lost the blessing, he asks for another one. He insists. He cries out loud. And he asks whether his father has truly saved nothing for him. It is a painful scene because, in that moment, it doesn't matter how impulsive he had been before. He understands that his own family worked against him. And Jacob? He is not simply a son manipulated by his mother. He sees the risk. He asks questions. He understands that he is lying. And he still walks into the room. When his father directly asks who he is, Jacob gives one simple lie. I am Esau. Rebekah designed the plan. Jacob chose to carry it out. And Isaac is not merely an elderly man who was deceived. He favors Esau and tries to settle the succession in secret, without gathering the family, confronting the conflict, or explaining why one son would be chosen. The most intriguing detail comes afterward. When Jacob is about to leave, Isaac blesses him again. This time, there is no disguise, no stolen clothing, no food prepared to deceive him. Isaac knows exactly who is standing in front of him, and he confirms that Jacob will carry the family line forward. Does that mean he accepted the outcome? That he realized too late that Jacob would be the heir? Or that he simply chose to manage a reality he could no longer undo? The narrative does not answer, but it makes one thing clear. The fraud in that room was not lightning striking a healthy family. It was the final result of years of favoritism, silence, and decisions made behind one another's backs. Over time, this story has been interpreted in very different ways. Some traditions focus on the fact that Esau did not value the birthright, while Jacob appeared more prepared to carry the family's responsibility. In that reading, Rebekah acted to prevent Isaac from handing the future to the wrong son. Other readings reject that justification. They recognize that Jacob was already connected to the promise, but they do not treat deception as virtue. The outcome may have aligned with what had been announced about him. The method still destroyed the household. And maybe that is where the story becomes most human. Sometimes a person can be right about the problem and completely wrong about the solution. Rebekah may have been right to question Isaac's choice, but she tried to correct favoritism with more favoritism. She tried to protect one son by using the other as the price, and she secured the blessing while making family life impossible. There is also a powerful psychological reading. Isaac and Rebekah created two systems of loyalty inside the same home. Esau learns that he receives love when he matches the image his father admires. Jacob learns that, in order to win, he must watch, wait, and work from behind the scenes. By the time succession arrives, neither brother is prepared to trust. They are prepared to compete. That is why the story does not give us a clean winner. Jacob receives the blessing, but he runs away. Esau loses the blessing, but he does not lose every possibility of a future. Rebekah wins the plan, but loses her son from the daily life of the home. Isaac is deceived, but he also helped create the environment in which deception began to feel necessary. The position changes hands. The family pays the price. So why does this still feel so current? Because favoritism rarely feels like favoritism to the person practicing it. The father says he simply identifies more with one of the children. The mother says she is protecting the one no one else values. One child believes he deserves more because he has always received approval. The other believes he has to fight for everything because he has always been at a disadvantage. By the time everyone notices, the family no longer functions like a family. Every achievement becomes a comparison. Every compliment feels like love being taken away from the other side. Every parental decision is read as proof of who matters more. And favoritism does not even have to be explicit. Sometimes it appears in the way a father tells one child's story with pride and changes the subject when the other speaks. In the 19th, person who is always called when an important decision has to be made. In the excuse one person receives and the other never does. In the expectation that one child must be responsible while the other is allowed to be brilliant. In the emotional inheritance that begins long before any document. There is another dangerous pattern here. Trying to correct one injustice by committing another. Someone believes the system is favoring the wrong person and decides that any method is acceptable if it fixes the outcome. A father tries to make up for years of absence by overprotecting one child. A mother hides information because she believes she knows what is best for everyone. A boss promotes someone behind the scenes because he thinks the team would never recognize the real talent. One friend excludes another to balance a relationship in which she has always felt left out. The problem is that control disguised as protection is still control. And when a family turns love into a beau prize, no one learns how to love without winning. And do you know what all of this reveals? This pattern does not appear only between parents and children. Any group can create the same system. 3 friends, but 2 always make the plans first, and the third only finds out later. A team where the least competent colleague gets every opportunity because he knows how to sell his image to the boss. A family where one sibling is always called to solve every problem, while the other only appears when someone needs money. Over time, people stop competing only for space. They begin competing for proof of value. Who gets heard first? Who receives the second chance? Who gets defended before anyone even knows what happened? And almost no one wakes up thinking, today I'm going to destroy this relationship. They think they are protecting someone, correcting an injustice, giving a chance to the person who deserves it. But favoritism does not only hurt the person left out, it also teaches the favorite that love may depend on victory. It teaches the rejected person that affection has to be earned. And it turns every relationship into a competition no one admits creating. Sometimes the outcome looks perfect. The chosen person wins. The decision turns out exactly as someone planned. But the friendship ends. The siblings stop speaking. The team divides, the house goes quiet, and that is when some victories begin to look exactly like what they really were, a carefully organized loss. History doesn't repeat, people do.